He walked into the Harwick Grand with grease under his fingernails and a 7-year-old boy holding his hand. That part he hadn't planned on. His son Eli had been at his neighbor Mrs. Potterton's house since 7 in the morning. But she'd called at noon. Her daughter had gone into early labor. She had to drive to Clarksburg immediately. She was so sorry she'd left a key under the mat. So Miles Decker drove to her house, buckled Eli into the truck, and then continued on to a job he had no business taking in the first place. The lobby of the Harwick Grand smelled like cedar and money. The floors were pale marble. A chandelier the size of a small car hung from the ceiling, and somewhere behind the front desk, a woman in a charcoal blazer was watching the two of them cross the room, like she was trying to determine which category of problem they fell into. Miles didn't slow down. Eli did, because Eli always slowed down for things worth looking at. He stopped in the middle of the lobby to stare up at the chandelier. "Dad, that has to be 1,000 bulbs." "Keep walking. I'm counting, Ellie." The boy trotted to catch up. He was wearing a striped shirt that had a small paint stain on the sleeve, sneakers that needed replacing, and an expression of complete wonder that he wore almost everywhere they went. Miles had inherited many things from his wife. That was one of them. He didn't let himself think about that for long. The call had come 3 days earlier, on a Tuesday, while Miles was elbow-deep in a transmission rebuild. His phone was on the workbench, and it rang 4 times before he wiped his hands enough to answer it. The voice on the other end was clipped, certain of itself. It introduced itself as belonging to a Mr. Frederick Ashton, head of facilities operations for the Harwick Group, a name Miles vaguely recognized from highway billboards and from the kind of newspaper he didn't read. "We were referred to you by Tom Haggerty," Ashton said. Miles set the phone to speaker and kept working. "Tom's a good man. He says you're better." Miles didn't respond to that. Ashton explained the situation in the way that people with money always explained their problems. Like, the problem itself was an inconvenience they hadn't deserved and were now graciously allowing you to solve. The Harwick Grand, their flagship hotel in Clearfield, was hosting its annual anniversary gala in 4 days. The gala was attended by the kind of people whose names appeared on buildings. The kind of people Mr. Ashton clearly aspired to be adjacent to as often as possible. 2 weeks before the event, the ballroom kitchen's primary ventilation system had started making a sound. Not a catastrophic sound, a hesitation. A low, uncertain wheeze that came and went during high-demand operations. The hotel's maintenance team had looked at it. 2 contracted HVAC firms had looked at it. A specialist brought in from Pittsburgh had spent 6 hours with it, charged them $4,000, and left a report that amounted to "we couldn't identify the root cause and recommend further evaluation." The gala was in 4 days. "We need someone who can actually fix it," Ashton said. "Not assess it, fix it." Miles was quiet for a moment. He could hear Eli in the next room, the apartment attached to the back of the garage, playing something with sound effects. Spaceships, maybe. Or robots. Hard to tell. "I don't do commercial jobs anymore," Miles said. "Tom said you'd say that." Tom was right. There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Ashton spoke again, something in his voice had shifted, though Miles wouldn't have called it humility exactly. More like a man recalibrating. "Mr. Decker, the firm that last assessed the system billed us for a day and a half of work. I would like to offer you twice that rate for the same window of time, whether you fix it or not." Miles thought about the property tax notice on his kitchen counter. He thought about Eli's sneakers. "I'll come take a look," he said. "That's all I'm promising." He had been a senior mechanical systems engineer at Kerrigan Automotive for 11 years. He'd worked on thermal management, on exhaust routing, on airflow optimization for vehicles that cost more than most people's houses. He had a degree he'd earned on a partial scholarship and finished while working nights at a tire shop. He understood how things breathed. Engines, buildings, systems of any kind. The principles didn't change much. Heat needed somewhere to go. If you blocked it, it found its own way, and that way was never the one you wanted. He'd left Kerrigan 4 years ago. That was the year Rachel died. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the last morning. He'd taken a leave of absence that became a resignation that became something he still hadn't entirely named. He'd come back to Millhaven, where his mother was, where Rachel's mother was, where there was room for a boy to run around and neighbors who would wave when you drove by. He'd bought the garage on Fenwick Street with a small inheritance and a loan he'd spent 2 years paying down. People brought him their trucks, mostly. Farmers and tradespeople. Occasional summer tourists with overheated engines or blown tires. He charged fairly, and he did the work right, and he did not explain to anyone what he used to do before this. Eli knew, in the vague way that 7-year-olds know things. He knew his dad fixed cars, and that he used to work somewhere big where they made cars, and that his mom had been an artist, and that she was gone now. He kept a drawing of hers taped to the inside of his bedroom door, a watercolor of a house in autumn that she'd done the year before she got sick. He'd never said why that one specifically. Miles had never asked. The kitchen was underground. That was the first thing Miles registered when the facilities manager, a nervous man named Bryce, who moved like he was always about to apologize for something, led him through a service corridor and down 2 flights of stairs. The ballroom kitchen occupied the entire lower level of the hotel, a long stainless expanse that smelled of industrial cleaner and faintly, beneath that, of old grease. The kind of grease that had been cooking into surfaces for 30 years and was now part of the walls. Eli walked beside him, very quiet, which meant he was absorbing everything. The ventilation system ran along the ceiling, a network of ductwork that fed through the kitchen and connected to 2 large fan units housed in a mechanical room off the back corridor. Bryce showed him the report from the Pittsburgh firm. Miles read it standing up, moving through the kitchen while he read, not because he needed to look busy, but because he thought better on his feet. The report was thorough and nearly useless. It documented symptoms with clinical precision and arrived at conclusions by elimination, ruling out the most obvious causes without finding the actual one. Miles had seen this before. Not stupidity, a different kind of intelligence. People trained to diagnose from the outside, from data and readings, who stopped looking once the readings didn't tell them what they expected. He handed the report back to Bryce. "Can you give me an hour in here alone?" Bryce glanced at Eli. "There's a break room upstairs where the boy could?" "He's fine," Miles said. "He stays with me." Eli sat on an overturned milk crate near the doorway and did not touch anything, because Miles had told him not to touch anything, and Eli generally followed rules when he understood the reason behind them. Miles had explained, on the drive over, that the kitchen was a working space where equipment was calibrated and disturbing it could cause problems, and Eli had nodded like he was filing this information away for future reference. Miles started at the fan units. He wasn't looking for anything specific yet. He was doing what he always did first, just listening, standing still with his hand on the casing, feeling the vibration, hearing the pitch. Engines talked if you knew how to listen. Buildings talked too. Most people didn't give them the time. The primary fan unit was running. It sounded at first entirely normal, a steady mechanical hum. Nothing that would alert you to a problem. He stood there for 4 minutes. Then he heard it, not a sound exactly, more like the absence of a sound. A fraction of a second where the pitch dropped just barely before correcting itself. You would not notice it if you were walking past. You would not notice it if you were looking at a meter or reading a gauge. You would only notice it if you were standing still, with your hand on the metal, not looking at anything, just listening. Miles crouched and started moving along the base of the unit. "What are you hearing?" Eli asked from his milk crate. "Something tired," Miles said. "Like a car?" "Sort of. More like something that's been fighting harder than it should have to for a long time." Ellie was quiet for a moment, then, "That sounds like people sometimes." Miles looked over at him. The boy was watching him with that particular expression, interested and still, the way Rachel used to get when something caught her attention. Miles turned back to the unit. "Yeah," he said, "it does." He found it an hour later. Not in the fan unit, not in the ductwork, in the connection between the two. A flex coupling that had been installed, based on the wear pattern, somewhere around 8 to 10 years ago. The coupling was designed to absorb vibration between the rigid ductwork and the fan housing. Over time, the inner lining had begun to separate, not visibly, not from a standard inspection, but enough to create an intermittent restriction. Under low demand, the system ran fine. Under high demand, a full kitchen, all burners running, the temperature differential at its maximum. The restriction caused the fan to cavitate, just briefly, just enough to produce that almost sound. That hesitation. The Pittsburgh firm had checked the fans. They'd checked the ductwork. They had not checked the coupling, because the coupling looked fine. Miles sat back on his heels and looked at it for a long moment. Then he stood up and went to find Bryce. Bryce was in the corridor, pretending to check his phone in a way that made clear he had been checking it constantly for the last hour. "I found it," Miles said. Bryce looked up. His expression moved through several things very quickly. What is it?" Miles explained. He kept it simple. The coupling, the degradation, the intermittent restriction. He watched Bryce's face and could see the man trying to determine whether this information made sense or whether he was being told something that merely sounded like it made sense. The Pittsburgh team didn't. They were looking at the components, not the connections. Bryce was quiet for a moment. "Can it be fixed?" "It can be replaced. Same day, if you can get the part. It's a standard size." Miles gave him the spec number, which he'd verified twice against the coupling housing. 3 hours of labor, maybe 4. The system will run clean. There was a long pause. "Mr. Decker," Bryce said carefully, "I want to make sure I'm understanding. You're telling me that the thing that 3 separate professional teams could not identify, in here, in 1 hour, with..." He glanced toward the kitchen doors, toward where Eli was, presumably still sitting on his milk crate. "You found it." Miles didn't say anything. "The part," Bryce said. "We'll have it by tomorrow morning." He came back the next morning at 7. Eli was with Mrs. Potterton again. Her daughter had had the baby. Everyone was fine. She'd been delighted to take him and had made the specific offer of letting him help name the daughter's cat, which Eli had accepted with the seriousness of someone given a great responsibility. Miles drove to the Harwick Grand in the quiet of the morning, when the town was still waking up, when the light was still low, and the air had that particular quality it got in late October. Cold enough to be real, not yet cold enough to hurt. He went in through the service entrance. He didn't need anyone to show him the way this time. The part was on the workbench in the mechanical room, still in its packaging. He opened it, verified the spec, verified it twice. Then he suited up and started working. This was the part that most people didn't understand about mechanical work. The part they imagined was crude or instinctive, all force and noise and improvisation. It wasn't. It was precise. It required patience and sequence and the kind of attention that couldn't be faked. You had to know the order of things. You had to understand what each step made possible for the next one. You had to be present in a way that left no room for anything else. Miles had always been good at that. Rachel used to say it was the thing she loved most about him, and also the thing that sometimes drove her insane, the way he could be so completely somewhere that he was almost unreachable. He worked through the morning. At 10:15, he ran the system at full load. He stood in the kitchen, alone, with every burner running, with the ventilation under maximum demand, and he listened. No hesitation, no drop. A clean, steady hum, even in continuous, the sound of a system running the way it was supposed to run. He stood there for 3 minutes, just to be sure. Then he turned off the burners and went to find someone to tell. He found more than Bryce. He found Bryce, and standing with Bryce was a woman in a charcoal suit, whose presence in the kitchen corridor had the effect of making Bryce stand differently, straighter, and somehow smaller at the same time. She was perhaps 60, with silver hair cut short, and the kind of posture that came from decades of being the person in the room who made decisions. "Mr. Decker," Bryce said. He said the name carefully, like he was presenting something. "This is Miss Harwick." Miles had not known there was still a Harwick at the Harwick Group. He would learn later that Lenora Harwick had taken over operations from her father when she was 32, had grown the company from a 2-property regional chain to a portfolio of 14 properties in 7 states, and was considered, in the specific world of independent luxury hospitality, something like a force of nature. He did not know any of this now. What he knew now was that she was looking at him with an expression that was not unkind but was completely unreadable. "Bryce tells me you found the problem in under an hour," she said. "I found it. Took a little longer to verify. 3 firms over 2 weeks couldn't find it. They were looking in the right places," Miles said, "just not at the right things." A very brief pause. "Is it fixed?" she asked. "Run it tonight at full load. You won't have any issues." She was quiet for a moment, looking at him with that steady, assessing gaze. "You came recommended by Tom Haggerty. Tom's generous. Tom is precise," she said. "He doesn't recommend people he's uncertain about." Another pause. "You were an engineer. Carrigan Automotive." Miles looked at her. "I do my research," she said. It wasn't an apology. "Why are you running a one-man garage in Millhaven?" It was a direct question, and he respected that, even if it wasn't one he intended to answer fully. Life changes, he said. She held his gaze for a moment in a way that suggested she understood that answer to mean more than it said, and that she was deciding whether to press it or let it stand. She let it stand. The rate we agreed on, she said to Bryce, then looked back at Miles. I'm going to add a fee for the correct diagnosis. That was the harder part. It was the same work. It was not the same work, she said simply. 3 professional teams failed at it. Please don't undercharge yourself. Miles was quiet. The gala is Friday, she said. I'd like to not think about that kitchen between now and then. You won't need to. She nodded once, briefly, like something had been confirmed rather than decided, and walked back the way she'd come. Bryce let out a breath that had clearly been held since her arrival. He picked up Eli at 2 o'clock. Eli had named the cat Copernicus, which the daughter had apparently accepted on the condition that they also call it Coop. He reported all of this on the walk to the truck with the detailed thoroughness he applied to things that mattered to him, and Miles listened and unlocked the truck and buckled him in. They were on the highway before Eli asked, "Did you fix it?" "Yeah." "The whole thing? So the party can happen?" "The gala. And yeah, it'll be fine." Ellie thought about this. He was looking out the window at the October fields, the trees stripped almost clean, the sky going that particular gray that meant rain before dark. "Dad," he said. "Yeah, when you were working today. Were you the only one who could figure it out?" Miles kept his eyes on the road. "I don't know that. Other people might have gotten there. But you got there first." He didn't say anything. "I think," Eli said, with the slow deliberateness he used when he was working something out, that knowing how to fix things that other people can't is a really good thing to be. Miles felt something shift somewhere in his chest, the way it had been shifting, now and then over the last year or so, like something very old and very set was slowly, carefully, becoming something else. "Your mom thought so too," he said. Eli nodded. Like this confirmed something he'd already suspected. They drove the rest of the way home in a comfortable quiet, the kind that didn't need filling. The fields gave way to the outskirts of Millhaven, the gas station and the hardware store, and the diner, where Miles had coffee most mornings, and then Fenwick Street with the garage and the apartment behind it, the light on in the window from the timer Miles set every morning. He pulled into the lot and cut the engine. Eli was already unbuckling, the way he did everything, with a kind of cheerful urgency, already thinking about the next thing. Miles sat for a moment longer. He thought about the sound he'd heard in that kitchen, or rather the near absence of it, that fraction of a second where something faltered. He thought about what it took to hear it. Not training, exactly, or not just training, something quieter than that. The willingness to stand still long enough for the world to tell you what was wrong. He'd spent 4 years learning how to do that again. He got out of the truck. "Race you to the door," Eli said. "That's not a fair race." "I know," Eli said, and ran. Miles watched him go. The striped shirt, the sneakers that needed replacing, the sound of his sneakers on the pavement. And then he followed, because that was what he did, and because some things you didn't need to name to know they were worth doing. The light in the window was on. He went inside.